A single bead of sweat trickled down Dr. Carmichael's temple as he hovered over the gleaming quantum chip, Willow, deep inside Google's top-secret research lab. Though dozens of brilliant scientists bustled around him, analyzing data, calibrating instruments, and comparing notes on the latest breakthroughs, it was as though Dr. Carmichael were alone with the miracle of technology in front of him. Willow shimmered with an otherworldly glow, a crystalline wafer etched with patterns beyond human comprehension. It hummed at a frequency that made the air in the room tingle. Some said that faint hum was the echo of parallel universes responding to Willow's impossible computing power. Others believed it was simply the result of advanced superconducting qubits. But no matter how Willow's abilities were explained, it held the promise, or threat, of unraveling the secrets of existence itself. Over the past few weeks, rumors about Willow's power had taken the world by storm. Word on the street was that this single chip could perform calculations so immense that even the best supercomputers would have required 10 septillion years to do the same. It became known among the masses as the gateway to unlimited possibilities. Some whispered in hushed tones that Willow's qubits actually tapped into parallel universes, siphoning off computational resources from an infinite chain of alternate realities. Others scoffed at the idea of parallel universes and swore it was merely advanced quantum processing taken to its extreme. Whatever the truth might be, it didn't stop the flood of adventurers, scholars, monster hunters, witches, cult leaders, and everyone in between from converging on Google HQ, desperate to catch a glimpse or get their hands on the chip. Outside the heavily guarded facility, throngs of travelers camped along the manicured roads, setting up colorful tents and playing instruments as though it were a festival. Each day, more caravans arrived, some from the sea, some from the distant mountain roads, and some by airship. Among them stood tall, tattooed mercenaries who twirled swords as long as their arms, robed mages clutching dusty tomes, and ordinary folk with curious hearts who simply yearned to see Willow for themselves. It was not every day that something so transcendent and potentially cosmic made itself known in the world. And so it was in this swirling mass of dreamers and opportunists that Pops arrived. He was a member of the famous Sailing Adventurers Guild, a well-traveled brawler known for his brash attitude and unstoppable fists. A single wave of dark hair spilled over his forehead, and a faint scar across his left cheek spoke of past battles on remote islands, skirmishes with sea monsters, and countless tavern brawls. Perched comfortably on his shoulder was the legendary Wiffle hen, its rainbow plumage shimmering in the high noon sun. The bird had a wry, curious expression, as though judging each passerby with a mischievous glint in its eyes. Pops affectionately called his pet the Whiff. He had discovered it in the heart of a perilous labyrinth on a floating island many years ago, a find that elevated him within the ranks of his guild. Rubbing its feathers unlocked random and often spectacular magic, though unpredictability made it as dangerous as it was beneficial. The crowd parted nervously for Pops, noting the determination in his step, the bulging muscle in his clenched fists, and the colorful bird that seemed to radiate subtle magical energy. He was, in many respects, a figure of both awe and mild dread. Yet any who saw him also knew Pops had a warm, generous heart beneath that tough exterior, and that his ultimate goal was deeply romantic, to marry his beloved girlfriend, Olive. In his eyes, though, he wasn't quite worthy, not yet. Not until he achieved such greatness that his name would be sung by bardic choirs and written in guild annals for centuries to come. Olive was not far behind. With hair that shone like polished copper and eyes a captivating shade of green, she turned heads wherever she went. Her slender yet athletic physique spoke of a life lived on the road, her traveling veterinarian's pack strapped across her back. While many considered her one of the most beautiful women in existence, those who spent time with her recognized a quick intellect and a formidable expertise in magical creatures. Olive's talent for mimicking animal calls had saved more than a few creatures in distress, and also gotten Pops and her out of trouble more than once. Despite her flirtatious demeanor, she adored Pops with all her heart. Yet she delighted in teasing him, playing hard to get whenever the mood struck. For the moment, she was far more excited at the prospect of encountering Willow. Perhaps, she mused, quantum computing on this scale could help unravel the biology of magical creatures in a way never before imagined. She squeezed Pop's arm as they approached the tall, sleek fence that surrounded the Google campus. "Easy now," she said softly, noticing how his fists kept clenching. "We don't know what's going on inside. Let's not start a fight unless we have to." Despite the caution in her voice, she couldn't help but crack a small, confident smile. She knew her man well enough. Where he walked, trouble often followed. "Don't worry," Pops answered, rolling his shoulders. "But if some geek in a lab coat tries to block my path to Willow, I'm sending them flying." He grinned and rubbed the Wiffle hen's neck feathers. The magical bird squawked indignantly and promptly caused the tip of Pop's nose to sparkle with faint, swirling illusions, like flickering starfields. It was a trivial magical quirk, but it earned a laugh from Olive nonetheless. Hidden among the crowd, glowering beneath the shade of an old tree, stood Hagatha, the last witch on earth. Dressed in tattered, dark robes embroidered with occult symbols, she clutched her gnarled staff, the wood crawling with monstrous engravings. Her eyes narrowed to slits as they focused entirely on Pops's sturdy form, the broadness of his shoulders, the faint stubble on his chin. Her wrinkled lips curled into a half-mad grin of obsession. For centuries, she had survived by conjuring and controlling monsters, feeding off their destructive impulses to steal what she needed, and ensuring her immortality through arcane bargains. But with other witches either hunted down or long passed into legend, she was the last of her kind. Her heart, such as it was, beat with a single desire, to possess Pops. She considered him the most handsome man in the world, his raw, brute strength a perfect complement to her ancient power. Standing in her way was that intolerable veterinarian, Olive, who dared monopolize his affections. Hagatha's blood boiled at the very thought. Before her, Willow beckoned. If the stories about the quantum chip tapping into parallel universes were true, Pops could potentially vanish into another realm with that cursed veterinarian. That was something she could never allow. She would do anything to ensure he stayed, ensuring Olive was out of the picture for good. And if that meant destroying Willow, unleashing a monstrous army, or rewriting reality itself, so be it. Her breathing quickened at the thought. Meanwhile, at the heart of the facility, a lean, sharp-eyed man paced the corridors. Professor Van Helsing, scion of a revered monster-hunting dynasty, was now the official guardian of Willow. Dressed in an immaculate longcoat over a reinforced leather vest, carrying silver-tipped stakes and magical amulets in hidden pockets, he brimmed with the stoic confidence of a man who knew his mission: to protect Willow from those who would misuse it, or from otherworldly beasts that might be drawn to its unimaginable power. Yet Van Helsing's primary desire, the one that had been ingrained into him from birth, was to hunt and eliminate the last witch on earth. To his mind, witches were the source of the world's monstrous abominations, and if he succeeded in cleansing the earth of them, humanity could finally know peace, at least from monstrous horrors. He had lost ancestors to the cruelty of witches, and now that Willow served as a beacon to supernatural threats, he was certain Hagatha would appear eventually. He was determined to be ready. Van Helsing's mind drifted briefly to the rivalry he had with Pops, though neither man had deliberately sought it. They moved in similar circles, after all, both were famed in their own right, both had a knack for high-stakes confrontation. Van Helsing's monster-hunting prowess contrasted sharply with Pops's brawling approach, but they tended to get in each other's way during certain joint missions. They were two unstoppable forces, each proud of their lineage and skill sets, so friction was inevitable. It didn't help that Olive's mild flirtation, likely out of some casual impulse, irked Pops to no end, fanning the flames of competition between them. Far outside the research labs, perched atop a majestic black carriage emblazoned with golden feathers, was Feathermaster. An imposing figure with a towering feathered headdress, each plume rumored to be stolen from different magical bird species across the globe, he exuded a regal aura tarnished by ruthless ambition. His face, elegantly sculpted, reflected his unwavering conviction that he was destined to be a god among mortals. Leading a fanatical band of cultists who worshipped him, Feathermaster believed Willow would cement his deityhood across the entire multiverse. He had heard rumors that the legendary Wiffle Hen was in the area too. For someone who longed to collect every scrap of magical plumage in existence, capturing the Wiffle Hen would be the ultimate prize. If he could fuse its random magic with Willow's infinite potential, even parallel universes would bow before him. One by one, these towering personalities converged on the Google campus. Tensions fizzled in the air. Pops and Olive were the first allowed past the guards, thanks partly to the name recognition of the Sailing Adventurers Guild and partly to a few well-placed maritime sponsors within Google's upper echelons. Inside the steel gates, the sprawling lawns and modern glass buildings were at odds with the medieval, fantastical aura these adventurers carried. Half the employees had never seen armor, monstrous familiars, or arcane relics up close, and the sight of them mingled with everyday programmers was surreal. Drones zipped overhead, some delivering lunch to staff, others scanning for unauthorized magic usage. After all, since Willow had become known, the campus was on permanent high alert. Well, a smooth voice sounded from a nearby walkway, if it isn't the famous Pops. Professor Van Helsing stepped into view, his well-fitted coat billowing behind him. Olive unconsciously straightened her hair, a slight spark of flirtation in her eyes. Van Helsing's lips tugged into a polite smirk. Did the guild send you to test out Willow's dimension-splitting computational powers, or did you come of your own accord? Pops narrowed his eyes, arms crossing. That's none of your business, Professor. But if you must know, I'm here to find out whether this Willow can open a gateway to a better world, one where maybe I don't have to keep punching every monster in sight. A flash of curiosity lit Van Helsing's features. And if it does open a gateway? He let the question hang. At length, he turned to Olive and offered the slightest bow of greeting. Always a pleasure to see you. Before Olive could respond, a booming cackle echoed across the courtyard. Hagatha had found her way in by a cunning spell that tricked the security drones into seeing her as a harmless old woman. Now, as she revealed her true self, monstrous shapes leapt from her swirling cloak of darkness. One was a massive spider-like creature the size of a horse, dripping with venomous green saliva. Another was a half-lion, half-salamander beast whose back shimmered with heat waves, scorching the pavement beneath its paws. Screams erupted from the nearby staff. Panic set in. Professor Van Helsing reached inside his coat in an instant, producing a silver stake inscribed with runes. Hagatha, he hissed, eyes narrowing with deadly focus. I was hoping you'd show up. Cackling again, the witch pointed a crooked finger at Van Helsing. Away with you, monster hunter. My business isn't with you but with Willow. She glanced sidelong at Pops, a disturbingly hungry look playing over her wrinkled face. And with my handsome fiancé-to-be. Olive's cheeks flushed red, half in fury and half in disgust. He's not your fiancé. She snarled, slinging her veterinarian's bag aside. Pops let out a roar of frustration. Darn it, Hagatha, how many times do I have to say no? Without hesitation, he charged forward. Rock 'em knock 'em, he shouted, delivering a swift, powerful jab that reverberated with magical force. Indeed, every time he declared one of his attacks, the Wiffle Hen's chaotic magical aura seemed to respond, swirling around his fists. There was a loud crack as the shockwave of his punch shattered the pavement, forcing the monstrous spider to leap backward. Van Helsing capitalized on the moment, gracefully lunging to slash at the lion salamander creature. Moonlit stake, he shouted, the runic engravings on his weapon flashing with a brilliant silver light. The stake elongated, forming a short spear that sliced into the beast's sizzling hide. It roared, flames licking up its flanks, but Van Helsing was unrelenting, parrying a claw swipe and slamming his foot into the creature's ribs. Hagatha waved her staff. Tear them apart. She unleashed a hail of dark orbs that whizzed and crackled through the air. Some hammered into the building's walls, leaving grotesque scorch marks. Others nearly clipped unsuspecting scientists, who fled in terror. Olive, with surprising agility, ducked behind a row of planters, rummaging through her bag. She pulled out a small whistle fashioned from a basilisk's horn and blew a shrill note. Almost instantly, a flock of crows from a nearby rooftop caught in response, dive-bombing Hagatha's monstrous minions to distract them. Pops, get the spider. Olive called, vaulting over the planters. I'll handle the salamander lion. A grin broke across Pop's face. Who am I to argue with my woman? He lunged at the spider, fist clenched. Earth-splitting uppercut. The very ground beneath him cracked with the force of his upward blow, the spider creature screeching as it was hurled a dozen feet into the air. It landed with a sickening thud, legs thrashing in confusion. Pops pounced on the stunned monster, driving punches like piston rods. Even Hagatha flinched at the sheer raw energy, jealousy smoldering in her eyes for a man she saw as unstoppable, and who would never be hers. Meanwhile, Olive sidestepped the lion salamander as it spat a stream of white-hot flames her way. Her veterinarian training in magical creatures allowed her to read its body language. She mimicked a calming lion call she had learned deep in the savannah, modulating her voice so the beast paused, snorting flames in confusion. It's okay, she cooed. You're under a spell, but it's going to be okay. For an instant, pity shone in her eyes for the once natural creature now warped by Hagatha's powers. She seized the opening, blew a different whistle note, summoning a wave of water elementals from the campus ornamental fountains. They doused the creature's flames, leaving it vulnerable. With one graceful slash of a scalpel imbued with a healing spell, she cut away a malignant growth of black magic behind its ear that tethered it to Hagatha's will. Freed from the witch's control, the creature slumped and growled softly in confusion, then limped away. Hagatha's eyes blazed with fury. You meddling veterinarian. With a sweep of her staff, she conjured a swirling maelstrom of shadow. Nightmare Maw! She screamed. A monstrous, spectral mouth formed above Olive, snapping downward with teeth of crackling negative energy. Suddenly, a shining stake spun through the air, colliding with the spectral jaws and dispersing the shadow spell in a shower of sparks. Van Helsing's voice rang out. I don't think so, hag. He advanced, retrieving his stake. Your fight is with me. Pops was about to charge Hagatha when a clamorous uproar broke across the campus entrance. Feather Master had arrived. Astride his black carriage, pulled by a team of large, flightless birds with shimmering purple plumage, he raised his staff crowned with a massive phoenix feather. His loyal cultists, clad in robes festooned with feathers of every color and adorned with stylized bird masks, swarmed the gates, chanting incantations to dispel security wards. The guards rushed in with standard firearms, but the cultists unleashed blasts of luminous feather-shaped projectiles that exploded on impact. Bow before the Feathermaster. One of the cult fanatics roared. Another volley of magical feathers soared through the air, embedding themselves in the walls with sizzling arcs of energy. Alarms blared. Chaos ensued. Feathermaster himself stepped off his carriage, flipping his grand headdress back proudly. The plumes reflected every color under the sun, an ostentatious symbol of his so-called divinity. He pointed his staff at Pops, focusing on the wiffle hen perched on the adventurer's shoulder. At last, he said, voice booming. The legendary wiffle hen, mine for the taking. And once I harness Willow, my godhood shall spread to every corner of existence, even across parallel realities. Pop sneered. Back off, fancy feathers. If you think I'm letting you get anywhere near the whiff, you've got another thing coming. He cracked his knuckles, fists tingling from the residual magic of his earlier attacks. In a swirl of feathers, several cultists rushed forward to overwhelm the battered campus guards. Olive gritted her teeth, heart pounding. We have to help them. She turned to see that Van Helsing was still locked in combat with Hagatha, and that the lion salamander had slunk away to nurse its wounds. The monstrous spider was now twitching on its back, apparently in its death throes from the beating Pops delivered. The entire campus was a battlefield, bursting with shrieks, blasts of magic, and the mechanical whir of Google's drone security trying and failing to contain the situation. Pops pivoted toward a group of cultists who were conjuring swirling plumes of energy from their staves. All right, you loons asked for it. He sprinted forward, the whiff squawking atop his shoulder. Hammer fist barrage. He let fly a flurry of brutal punches, each blow accompanied by swirling arcs of multicolored energy from the wiffle hen. The cultists crumpled, one after another, robes fluttering with the impact. A triumphant grin spread across Pop's face, until Feathermaster himself seemed to materialize behind him. You are strong, Feathermaster intoned, adjusting his headdress with one hand. With the other, he slashed the air. Talon storm. In a flurry, razor-sharp feather constructs blasted outward, swirling around Pops in a vortex. The adventurer crossed his arms to block, but the feathers sliced at his forearms, leaving shallow cuts that burned with some unknown avian curse. He spat blood and forced his way through, launching a clumsy jab at Feathermaster, who gracefully sidestepped, leaving arcs of swirling feathers in his wake. While Pops and Feathermaster began their duel, Olive rushed to the side of a wounded guard. She worked quickly, mixing herbs and chanting a short healing incantation that soothed the guard's injuries. Around her, half a dozen frightened employees cowered. Get indoors, she shouted. Take the wounded with you, stay out of the line of fire. They hesitated for a moment, then obeyed, eyes wide with fear. Olive spun around, spotting a group of cultists about to unleash a barrage of feather spells on more helpless staff. She dashed in, sliding to a stop. Back off, or I'll, but she was cut off as the cultists loosed their spells. Olive was forced to duck behind a toppled metal bench, lumps of sizzling magic bouncing off the pavement. Hagatha, noticing that Van Helsing's attention was partially drawn by the new assault, seized her chance. Dark menagerie. She whirled her staff. 5 shadow beasts took shape, each the size of a large wolf, fangs dripping with corrosive saliva. They bounded forward, leaping at Van Helsing. The monster hunter stood his ground with preternatural calm, brandishing 2 silver daggers from hidden sheaths. The runes along their blades glowed faintly in time with his accelerated heartbeat. Dance of the crescent blade, he shouted, spinning in a tight circle, blades flashing like ribbons of light. Each shadow beast howled as its essence was sliced apart, the fragments dissolving into black mist. For centuries, I've slain the spawn of witches, Van Helsing hissed, leveling his blades at Hagatha. You will be the last. Hagatha's voice wavered between a scream and a cackle. You think you're so mighty, monster hunter? I've outlived entire kingdoms. With renewed fury, she thrust her staff into the ground, causing a dark, swirling rift to open. Tendrils of twisted magic poured out, coiling around her arms. Witness the true terror of the last witch on earth. Abyssal mutation. Her form distorted, bones cracking audibly as she transformed into a towering abomination. Her spine elongated, sprouting spines and horns, and her face twisted into a hideous serpentine visage. She roared, the very air shuddering with ancient sorcery. Van Helsing's face hardened. He muttered a brief prayer under his breath. Then, drawing upon a final reservoir of prepared spells, he stabbed one dagger into the ground. A circle of bright runes sprang up around him, forming a protective radius. He brandished his remaining dagger at the monstrous Hagatha. This ends now. While the battle lines were thus drawn, inside the building itself, Google's senior engineers scrambled to secure Willow. Dr. Carmichael and his colleagues had sealed the lab behind reinforced blast doors. Yet the surge of magical energy from outside had begun to interfere with the delicate quantum systems, sending the readouts haywire. Lights flickered. Warnings beeped in a shrill cacophony. And then, as though responding to all the chaos and desperation, Willow began to glow more intensely, humming at a deeper frequency that rattled the teeth in one's skull. In the courtyard, arcs of strange, shimmering light appeared overhead, like auroras dancing in broad daylight. Though few recognized it, these lights were tears in reality, brief glimpses into parallel worlds. Just as so many had theorized, Willow's power was bridging universes. Air currents warped. A mosaic of swirling color flickered, reflecting other possibilities, glimpses of desert landscapes above, underwater cities in the shimmering corners, even floating islands not unlike those that existed in the world's legends. In the midst of his duel with Feather Master, Pops felt the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. He glanced skyward, momentarily forgetting his pain. Olive, he gasped, realization dawning. If Willow truly tore open a gateway, he could, at last, find that perfect world for them, a realm where a happy life would be guaranteed. But that thought also meant others could exploit it. Feather Master, Hagatha, Van Helsing, everyone had their own reasons. The images swirling overhead only fueled their desires. Feather Master lunged, staff whirling, a flurry of divine feathers surging forth. I won't be denied by some lovesick brawler, he roared. Bow before the new god of the multiverse. Pops responded with a primal shout, meeting the projectile feathers head on. Fist of the Typhoon. The Wiffle hen let out a triumphant squawk as swirling gale force winds erupted around Pop's fist, deflecting the razor feathers with hurricane-like gusts. Windows shattered from the force. Feather Master stumbled back, eyes widening behind his regal mask. Nearby, Olive conjured a paralyzing net of creeping vines to trap a squad of cultists. Spotting Feather Master on the defensive, she cupped her hands around her mouth and bellowed an animal call that rang out like thunder, one she had learned from a storm drake. The call transformed into a localized storm that battered the cultists with sheets of horizontal rain and stinging hail. Lightning flashed overhead. I owe you one, babe, Pops shouted, pressing his advantage. He vaulted forward, spinning into a mid-air kick. Cyclone roundhouse. The wind around his leg condensed, forming a vortex that slammed into Feather Master's staff and shattered part of it. The cult leader snarled in shock, feathers scattering like lost leaves on the wind. Before he could regain his footing, Pop slammed a left hook into his side, sending him careening across the courtyard. The self-proclaimed god tumbled through a row of planters, leaving a long furrow in the grass. Yet he was not so easily beaten. With trembling hands, Feather Master rose, chanting words of power. The ground quaked. The plume of his battered staff glowed an eerie gold. I summon the Phoenix rebirth, he cried. From the broken fragments of the staff's tip, Phoenix flames erupted into a swirling pillar, forming a towering bird of living fire that screeched at the heavens. Return to me, my power. Feather Master's eyes glowed with manic intensity as the Phoenix soared around him, bathing him in crackling inferno. His cuts sealed, his bruises vanished, and an unearthly aura of renewal pulsed in every feather on his robes. Across the courtyard, Van Helsing was locked in a desperate battle with Hagatha's abomination form. She towered over him, spined limbs lashing out, each blow enough to fracture the ground beneath. The protective circle of runes flickered as it absorbed her monstrous might, cracks forming in the luminous symbols. Van Helsing's muscles strained, sweat pouring from his brow. Crescent Blade Overdrive, he roared, unleashing a series of spinning slashes that sliced through the abomination's protruding spines. Black ichor spattered the ground. Hagatha hissed in fury, slamming both claws down. Van Helsing flipped backward at the last instant, panting. From behind a battered security kiosk, Olive aimed her blowgun, a gift from a forest-dwelling tribe. She loaded a single dart with an anti-magic serum designed for large mythical beasts. It was a long shot, but if it found purchase in Hagatha's mutated hide, it might break the witch's transformation. She squinted, controlling her breathing, then exhaled. The dart zipped through the air. Hagatha's serpentine eyes flared wide as it sunk into her shoulder. The abomination screeched, thrashing. Steam rose from the point of impact as the twisting shadows receded, leaving the witch in her old form, staff clattering from her trembling hands. She slumped, gasping and glaring at Olive with a hatred that burned hotter than any scorching flame. Van Helsing seized the advantage, pressing his stake to Hagatha's chest. The runes glowed ominously. No more witches. The world will be free of monsters, he said, voice cold. Stop, Pops shouted, seeing the confrontation. The wiffle hen fluttered anxiously on his shoulder. I've got a bone to pick with her too, but if you kill her, are you any better than the monsters you hunt? He couldn't believe he was defending Hagatha, but something in him, maybe that loving heart, or maybe just a gut feeling, told him that outright ending her right there was wrong. Even if she'd caused no end of trouble, she was still alive, still capable of remorse or change. Van Helsing froze, teeth grinding. The runes on his stake flickered. You know how many people like her have terrorized the world? He demanded. How many innocents have died because witches conjured monsters to do their bidding? I'm well aware, Professor, Pops growled, stepping forward, fists still clenched. But I also know that if we had half a chance to fix this messed up world, maybe we can figure out how to do it without more killing. You can hold her prisoner or whatever, but do it after we see what's going on with Willow. Hagatha, trembling, hatred still surging in her gaze, sneered at Van Helsing. You naive fools. You think you can rid the world of darkness so easily? Shut up, Olive snapped, standing beside Pops, blowgun in one hand. You caused enough trouble. Be grateful we're giving you a second chance at all. In the distance, Feathermaster, wreathed in phoenix flames, soared above the courtyard, cackling. A perfect world for everyone? Why stop at one? With Willow, I'll rule every last universe that exists. He gestured toward the lab building. Cultists, breach those doors. Take Willow for me. A fresh surge of robed figures sprinted toward the fortified entrance, chanting spells to tear open the steel gates. Meanwhile, the shimmering tears in the sky grew larger, flickering through a cascade of parallel realities. Strange shapes moved beyond each rift, some friendly, some terrifying, but all equally curious about the gateway forming. Not on my watch, roared Pops, leaving Hagatha's fate in Van Helsing's reluctant hands. He charged the cultists, arms pumping. Battering ram blitz. With unstoppable momentum, he crashed into their formation, fists and feet flying in an unstoppable flurry. Energy blasts from the wiffle hen's random magic sparked overhead, some buffeting Pop's allies, some hindering the cultists' own spells. It was chaos incarnate, but Pops kept swinging, forging a path of battered, unconscious cultists in his wake. Olive came up behind him, summoning small swarms of magical rodents from her bag, animals that she had rescued in previous adventures, now enchanted to help her fight. They nipped at the cultists' ankles, squeaking in comedic fury. With a shriek, one cultist tumbled head over heels, tangling up three more behind him. Then Feathermaster descended, eyes blazing. He whipped his staff, calling down swirling pillars of phoenix fire to separate Pops and Olive. This ends now, he yelled, incensed at their audacity. Pops and Olive were forced to roll in opposite directions to avoid being incinerated. Feathermaster launched himself into the air, wings of flame erupting from his back. Sun Emperor's judgment, he bellowed, gathering a massive orb of fire between his hands. From the corner of his vision, Pops saw the roiling orb of flame intensify. The heat was unbearable, lashing his skin like 1,000 whips. He steeled himself, bracing. If that hits, we're toast, he muttered through gritted teeth. With grim determination, he rubbed the whiff's rainbow feathers, silently hoping the random magical effect would be something big enough to counter the incoming blast. The bird squawked and glowed with a pinkish light. A swirl of sweet-scented mist enveloped Pops. That's not helpful. He barked, coughing in the sugary fog. Then he realized something extraordinary. The mist seemed to condense around his arms and shoulders, forming a translucent, shimmering armor. He flexed a fist. Hey, I'll take it, he shouted, grateful for the stroke of luck. He crouched, rearing his fist back. New technique time. Sugar Armor Punch. It was a ridiculous name, but given the swirling pink aura around him, it seemed apt. He sprang upward, meeting the descending orb of phoenix fire. His fist collided with the fiery mass, the sugar armor sizzling but absorbing a huge portion of the inferno. With a thunderous crack, the orb exploded in a kaleidoscope of sparks and molten embers that rained across the plaza. Feathermaster stared in disbelief. Impossible. No one has ever stopped my Sun Emperor's judgment. Pops coughed, his sugar armor melting away into sweet rivulets that hissed on the scorched ground. Guess you haven't met the whiff, he panted. Out of nowhere, a monstrous roar resonated through the building's interior, as if something had broken loose. The blast doors exploded outward in a shower of metal shards. In the swirling smoke stood a massive figure, an abomination of raw data and monstrous energy that had somehow manifested from Willow's quantum distortions. The intangible had become tangible. This glitching, fractal beast strobed between existence and non-existence, its silhouette flickering with arcs of otherworldly code. It let out a piercing roar that shook the foundations of the campus. What is that thing?" Olive exclaimed, eyes wide with alarm. Van Helsing, who still held Hagatha at bay, felt the wave of dreadful energy roll over him. So it's true. Monsters from beyond this reality are being drawn here. He hardened his grip on his stake, forcing Hagatha to the ground. "Hagatha, call off any illusions you have. We have bigger issues." Hagatha spat blood and glared, but she saw the monstrous fractal entity looming. "I had nothing to do with that," she hissed, though her voice trembled. "That's your precious Willow's doing." Feathermaster, enthralled by the spectacle, floated upward to get a better view. A monster born of parallel computation. Can it be harnessed? He wondered aloud, drunk on the possibility. If I control it, the multiverse is mine. Dr. Carmichael and a few terrified scientists peered from behind scattered debris, desperately hitting emergency shutdown commands on their tablets. But Willow no longer responded. The machine was operating on a level beyond their control, bridging cosmic barriers with unstoppable curiosity. "Pops," Olive called out, "we need to end this quickly or that thing's going to tear the campus, and possibly our entire world, apart." With mutual understanding, the battered combatants paused in their personal vendettas. Even Hagatha, breathing raggedly, recognized the threat. Feathermaster, still convinced of his own divinity, took it upon himself to challenge the fractal beast, launching a deluge of phoenix fire at it. The flames splashed harmlessly off the swirling geometry of the creature, as though reality itself parted to protect it. It roared, then generated an enormous prismatic beam of destructive quantum code that incinerated half of Feathermaster's carriage. "Fall back," cried one of the cultists, voice shaking. Feathermaster cursed but retreated, uncertain how to proceed. Pops turned to Van Helsing. "Truce until we take that thing down?" Van Helsing nodded curtly. "Truce," he said, though he still held Hagatha in a partial binding. "We'll deal with the witch and with all of this madness after we contain that anomaly." Hagatha's eyes flicked between them, calculating. Realizing she couldn't overpower both men alone, she growled and brandished her staff. "Let's just kill that monstrosity. I'm not letting it ruin my shot at being with Pops, or your shot at your perfect world." Olive exhaled, adjusting her bag strap. "All right, guess we're all in this together for now." Strange fractal arms extended from the beast's torso, each ringed with swirling runes that seemed to represent lines of code from distant realities. With a terrifying screech, it unleashed another beam of luminous energy that ripped through a corner of the main building. Glass and metal melted from the intensity. Van Helsing grimaced. "Its hide is intangible. We need something capable of collapsing the quantum distortions." He looked at the wiffle hen on Pops's shoulder, an idea sparking. The random magic of that bird might be our only chance. The unpredictability of it might disrupt the beast's own patterns. Pops nodded. "We'll try anything. Just make sure you can back me up in case the random magic isn't strong enough." Feathermaster, stung by his earlier defeat, soared overhead, his staff blazing. "I refuse to let some glitch monster claim the power of Willow." He unleashed a swirling column of phoenix flames again, attempting to corral the beast. The fractal entity roared, fractal limbs blotting out the fire. Then, in a flash of prismatic energy, it hurled a spiked tendril at Feathermaster, impaling his left shoulder. Feathermaster screamed, crashing to the ground in agony. Several of his cultists rushed to him, chanting healing spells, but the wound hissed with disruptive code that defied normal magic. "Darn it!" Pops muttered. Then, clenching his teeth, he sprinted forward, leaping onto a chunk of debris that gave him a vantage point. "Whiff, do your stuff." He vigorously rubbed the wiffle hen's feathers. The bird squawked, eyes rolling as it unleashed a torrent of swirling lights. A series of golden glyphs spiraled around Pops, swirling upward. "All right, here goes nothing." He shot forward, propelled by an invisible wind. Turbo Nova Punch. The glyphs formed a brilliant comet-like aura around his fist as he slammed it into the fractal beast's side. Reality rippled. For an instant, the monster's intangible shell flickered, revealing a core of swirling cosmic energy. The beast shrieked, staggering backward. Olive seized that moment, stepping forward with a specialized net, the same paralyzing vines but woven with an intricate pattern of runes she had acquired during her veterinarian apprenticeship among forest druids. "Quantum snare," she shouted, tossing the net. The vines expanded midair into a vast, web-like structure that latched onto the flickering core. The fractal beast howled, fractal limbs flailing helplessly. "Hagatha," Pops roared. "Finish it off with some of that big witch magic." For a moment, Hagatha resisted, hating that she was helping. Yet she realized that if she wanted any chance at controlling Pop's future, if she wanted a future at all, this monstrosity had to be destroyed. She raised her staff, black energy swirling. Shadow cataclysm. A sphere of concentrated void formed at the staff's tip, then she hurled it into the beast's open core. The resulting explosion was spectacular, an implosion of fractals and arcane code that collapsed inward, flickering with strobing lights. The monster's screech cut off abruptly. The swirling tears in the sky began to close, as though the fractal creature's presence had stabilized them, and now, with it gone, the rifts collapsed. Feathermaster, half delirious with pain, watched as the final glimpses of the parallel worlds blinked out. "No," he cried. "My destiny. Stolen from me." For a few long seconds, everyone stood panting in the wreckage-strewn courtyard, the air still crackling with residual magic. Olive slumped to her knees, exhaustion overwhelming her. Pop stumbled over to her, pulling her into a tight embrace. Van Helsing released Hagatha, who rubbed her bruised wrists but remained silent, surveying the devastation. Smoke curled from the shattered building, sparks dancing in the air where Willow's lab once stood. Google employees carefully emerged from hiding. Then, with a soft hum, Willow, still intact in the remains of the lab, powered down. Its shimmering glow faded to a gentle, lifeless flicker. An uneasy hush settled over the entire campus. Some believed that with the fractal beast defeated, Willow had exhausted its bridging capacity. Others suspected it had simply withdrawn its power, sensing the danger it posed. Either way, the swirling rifts overhead were gone. Reality was stable once more. Professor Van Helsing knelt down, scanning the battlefield with a calm, analytical gaze. After a moment, he stood, turning to face Hagatha. She glared at him, staff raised in weary defiance. "Go on, then," she sneered. "Finish your vow. You wanted me dead, didn't you?" Van Helsing hesitated. Glimpsing the carnage, the battered cultists, the trembling employees, the frightened survivors, he realized that perhaps the greatest threat to humanity wasn't just witches or monsters, but the unbridled ambition that could drive people to unleash horrors. And, ironically, it was Hagatha's magic that helped end the fractal beast. "Maybe I was wrong," he murmured, lowering his stake. "If you promise not to conjure more atrocities, I won't kill you." He still believed witches were a curse on the world, but for the first time, he wondered if there might be another way. Pops exhaled slowly, turning toward Willow's battered lab. "So, is that it?" he asked softly, almost to himself. "No parallel world for me and Olive?" His girlfriend placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, turning him to face her. "Any world you're in is the perfect world for me," she said softly, her gaze gentle. He felt a blush creeping into his cheeks, tears threatening to form. "Yeah, well. Guess we'll have to build our own perfect life right here, huh?" Van Helsing's voice drew their attention. "I'll remain as Willow's guardian for a while," he said. "At least until we can be sure no other monstrous threats come after it." Feathermaster, still crumpled on the ground in pain, let out a bitter laugh. "You think this is over? Willow's power. Others will come for it. They always do." His eyes flickered with a spark of mania before he blacked out. His cultists, confused and leaderless, began to gather him up to retreat. Hagatha, staff clutched to her chest, stared at Pops as though waiting for some declaration of love. But all she saw was him holding Olive with tender affection. Something in Hagatha's ancient heart twisted. She turned away with a rasping sigh. "You'll regret not choosing me," she muttered. And, with a swirl of ragged robes, she melted into the shadows. Whether she planned to reform her ways or redouble her efforts was unknown, but for now, at least, she vanished into the night. Pops and Olive stood side by side, surveying the battered campus. Drones buzzed overhead, dispatching anti-fire foam onto smoldering wreckage. Engineers in protective gear hurried to assess Willow's condition. Security forces tended to the wounded. Van Helsing was speaking quietly with Dr. Carmichael, presumably discussing additional wards and protective measures for the quantum chip. Above, the sky began to clear of the swirling anomalies, revealing a calm, star-studded evening creeping over the horizon. Olive leaned her head on Pop's shoulder. "You know, you could have just asked them for a ring or something if you wanted to propose," she teased softly, referencing the madness that had unfolded. "Maybe a quiet candlelight dinner next time?" Pop smiled sheepishly. "I've never been one for subtlety." He looked down at the wiffle hen, who gave a satisfied coo. "Guess that's part of what makes me, me." She giggled. I guess so. But I love you for it. She paused, scanning the hushed aftermath. So, what now? Are you still going to try to become one of the world's greatest adventurers? He tightened his arm around her. Darn right. There's a whole world of islands, monsters, and mysteries out there. Willow taught me that there are infinite possibilities, maybe not always accessible, but they're out there. So let's keep exploring. Together. From several yards away, Van Helsing inclined his head at them. Though it took him time to accept that some threats needn't always be met with lethal force, and that maybe there was more to his mission than a simple black and white notion of eliminating witches, he found a small measure of respect for Pops and Olive. If the world ever needs defending again, he said, half smiling, I'll be there. And if Hagatha resurfaces, I know who to call for backup. Pops snorted. You still owe me a fight sometime, Professor. No fractal abominations, no witches, just you and me, knuckle to stake. Van Helsing gave a slight chuckle. Careful what you wish for. Then he turned, gazing at Willow, a ghost of concern on his face. Just remember, nothing that taps into the infinite can be fully controlled. In the weeks that followed, the story of the battle for Willow swept the globe. Some spun it as a cautionary tale about the folly of chasing godlike power. Others romanticized it as a heroic saga, praising the adventurers who prevented cataclysmic disaster. The truth lay somewhere in between. Repairs to Google's campus were slow but steady, aided by philanthropic donations from around the world. It was uncertain if Willow would ever operate at full capacity again, or if Google's top brass would even dare risk reactivating it fully. That question lingered, as did rumors that Hagatha might still be plotting in the shadows, or that Feather Master's cult was regrouping to free their wounded leader. And always, the parallel universes beckoned in the dreams of those with unquenchable ambition. But for Pops, a new life chapter was beginning. He and Olive set sail once more, the Wiffle hen perched contentedly on the ship's prow, scanning the horizon for new wonders. They journeyed from port to port, taking on missions from the Sailing Adventurers Guild, forging friendships, and occasionally crossing paths with Van Helsing or other legends. Pop still swung first and asked questions later. Olive still teased him whenever she could. But they both carried the memory of that day at Google HQ in their hearts, a reminder that unstoppable power was rarely the answer, and that sometimes love, pride, and a little chaotic magic were all you needed to steer destiny in the right direction. Van Helsing, too, continued his monster hunting, but with a new perspective. After that day, he started to question the black and white zeal that had guided him all his life. He had witnessed the monstrous fractal entity that had no ties to witches at all, a horrifying reminder that the world's darkness was bigger than any one cause. Hagatha, ironically, had helped defeat it. The professor began devoting time to capturing and rehabilitating certain monsters, rethinking whether total eradication was always necessary. It was a small step, but an important one. As for Hagatha, no one knew exactly where she went after slipping away in defeat. Rumors circulated that she holed up in ancient ruins to brood and nurse her wounded pride, that she traveled across the seas in search of arcane relics powerful enough to rewrite love itself, that she might even appear at remote villages, disguised as a harmless old woman, gathering resources for some new, secret plan. One thing was certain, she had glimpsed the horrifying potentials of absolute power, she had conjured enough cruelty to witness how quickly the world threatened to spiral into chaos. Whether her obsession would change or deepen, only time would tell. And somewhere in a hidden lair, Feather Master's cult tended to their broken leader. He lay semi-conscious, cursing the name of Pops, cursing Willow for its fleeting gift of cosmic revelation. He swore one day he would gather more feathers, more mystical power, rise once again, and become the god he always knew he was meant to be. His cultists believed him fervently, continuing to gather feathers from around the world, even from bizarre creatures no one had heard of. For them, the dream was not over, merely postponed. At Google HQ, Dr. Carmichael oversaw the slow, methodical reassembly of the lab around Willow. Protective wards, arcane and technological, layered the walls. Drones hovered in constant vigilance. The brilliant quantum chip was placed under observation, studied from every angle. At times, it softly pulsed, as though remembering its brush with infinite realities. Nobody was entirely sure what Willow's future held. Perhaps, with caution and collaboration, it could still bring about breakthroughs that would benefit humanity. Or perhaps the temptation of infinite power would always be too great for mortal minds. Yet for now, the world breathed a collective sigh of relief. The monstrous fractal entity was defeated, the rifts were closed, and daily life resumed, albeit with a vivid new cautionary tale about dabbling with powers that might come from parallel universes. If there was one message the cataclysmic showdown hammered home, It was that no one person could or should lay claim to infinite dominion. Ambition, love, pride, these forces ran hot in the veins of every adventurer, witch, or cult leader. They could drive men and women to achieve greatness or plunge the world into chaos. The line between those extremes was perilously thin. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sea in soft pastel colors, Pop stood at the helm of his sailing ship with Olive beside him, her hand in his. He watched the sun break free from the water's edge, bathing their vessel in warmth. The whiffle hen ruffled its feathers, letting out a lazy morning cluck. Pops took in the moment, feeling as though, for the first time, he understood how fleeting perfection could be, and how it didn't need a parallel universe to be found. It was there in the gentle sway of the waves, in the mischievous glimmer in Olive's eyes, in the open possibilities of tomorrow's horizon. He turned to Olive, heart swelling with love and pride. "When we get to the next island," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you." She tilted her head curiously, a soft smile already forming. But no matter what she guessed, she couldn't possibly imagine the elaborate ring he'd had custom forged in secret by a dwarven jeweler on their last mission. She couldn't know about the quiet promise he'd made to himself that day at Google HQ, when a monstrous threat had reminded him how precious and fragile life could be. He wanted to face all future dangers side by side. He wanted to earn her heart fully, not by becoming the greatest adventurer in the world, but by becoming the best partner she could ever want. And so, though Willow's cosmic doorways were closed, the future looked brighter than ever. Across the sea, beyond the horizon, a new adventure awaited. One that would continue to shape them all, Pops, Olive, Van Helsing, and even the lurking shadows of Hagatha and Feathermaster, testing their love, their pride, and their willingness to see past personal ambition for the sake of a greater harmony. Maybe one day, if humanity proved itself wise enough, Willow could be used responsibly, to peer into other worlds without bringing them to ruin. Maybe, in some parallel universe, they were all already living their best lives. But right here, on this ship, in this world, in this dawn light, Pops felt that, for the first time, he was exactly where he was meant to be. And though the memory of raging battles, monstrous abominations, and near-apocalyptic quantum distortions would always linger, it only served to remind him how fortunate he was that love and pride had guided him to fight for what truly mattered. He grinned at the golden sky, the open sea, and at Olive's warm presence by his side. Tomorrow was uncertain, but that was the thrill of it. Together, they would face whatever came next, fists ready, hearts brave, and perhaps, in doing so, carve out their own perfect world right here, no cosmic computers required.